Here we are in a Unity HDRP project. Now just close a couple folders here and we're going to make a new scene. So I'll go File, New Scene, and we're going to do a basic outdoor scene and hit Create. As soon as I hit Create, it's going to ask us to give the scene a name. Now, I'll call this Biome_001. After I'm done typing, I'll go ahead and hit Save. Now Unity is going to build the scene, and this may take just a few seconds. As soon as it's done building the scene, I'll go ahead and save the scene and the project. So I'll go File, Save, and File, Save Project. I've already installed Gaia, so if I go to Window, I can find Procedural Worlds, Gaia, Show Gaia Manager. And when I first open it up, it's going to have to do a little bit of processing. Gaia is going to ask me if I want to see the website while I wait. I just click on No Thanks. I'll go ahead and speed up the video. Now that it's done setting things up, let's go ahead and move the Gaia Manager window to the center of the screen so we can get a better look at it. If you watched the Gaia Basics video I made, you know what's next. We need to upgrade this to use the high definition pipeline. So we'll just click on this, and it'll ask if we want to set it up for the Gaia high definition. We say yes. Then it's asking if we'd like to save the scene. We'll go ahead and say yes. Do we wish to use Gaia's RP asset, render pipeline asset? Yes. After this, it's going to think for a second, and then it has a few more questions for us. Do we wish to set up the default Unity HDRP terrain shader on the existing terrain? Yes. It looks like you're starting with a new terrain and HDRP lighting is not set up. Would you like us to set it up? Yes. Then lastly, we need to install the proper shaders. Click on the Install Shaders. You're about to install the new shaders. Go ahead and hit yes. And as soon as this is done, I'm going to go ahead and save the scene again and the project, just so I have it as a backup. We're all set up now, so let's go File, Save, and File, Save Project. I want a sample terrain to practice on, so I'm going to go to the Gaia Manager and I'm going to select Create World. It's number 2, Create World. Now we're going to change the biome and we're going to change it to Custom. It's worth noting that you should remember this one step because we're actually going to be talking about it later in the video. Our world size is medium, our target platform is desktop, and we're going to set this to World Designer Random Generation. And now we can just click on Create World Designer. So it's going to think for a second and show us a display of a possible terrain. Now I'll just move this over. Zoom in, we can take a look. You can see where the ocean would be. You can see where the land would be. Now, if you wanted to change your sample terrain, it's easy enough. You could just go over to the randomize stamps or randomize all, which are over here on the right. You can see randomize all, randomize stamps. But before I generate the world, let's take a look at the Create World section again. And you can tell that there are no spawners in the list. It says list is empty. So I'm going to go ahead and click Generate and click OK. Gaia is now creating a terrain with no spawners on it. So here we go. We have our terrain. Move this out of the way and we can take a look at it. If I zoom in, you'll just see a checkerboard pattern on it. It has no materials, no objects on it. It's just a terrain. Now I'm going to go ahead and go File, Save. I accidentally hit Save As, so I'll just go to the Scenes folder, select it, and click on Save. Next, I'll go back to the File menu and just select Save Project. The next thing we need to do is actually create a spawner. So we're going to go to Advanced, and then click on the plus on Gaia Tools, and click on Create New Spawner. Now if we look in the Hierarchy window, we'll see that our new spawner exists. For now, we don't actually need the Gaia Manager, so I'm just going to close that window. Now that we have this sample terrain and we have our spawner, I'm just going to go and move the camera up a little bit so you can actually see the terrain in the game view. Next, I'm just going to select the spawner in the hierarchy so we can see its details in the inspector on the right. But before we start playing with it, I wanted to talk to you about a core concept. I actually started this video over several times because I needed to be able to convey the base concept of how this works. After several attempts, I've come up with a comparison to two programs most people know. The old way of doing terrains is a lot like Photoshop, whereas the new way of doing things is a lot like the program Illustrator. Both of these programs have the ability to create layers, and you're allowed to make art on individual layers. But most people in Photoshop paint directly. They grab a mouse, they grab a stylus, they pick a color, and they just start painting. Then they may choose a new layer and start painting with a different color. But in programs such as Illustrator, you actually create your art by making shapes. The shapes you make in Illustrator or any other vector art program typically are made with what we call splines. They're mathematically based. Now, to a traditional artist, Illustrator can be somewhat daunting because they're used to directly painting shapes and colors. But there is an advantage to using Illustrator. A person that has created art in Illustrator can go back to any phase of the artwork and make changes, which is very important in production. So even though the Photoshop user may have a more direct method, the Illustrator user has the ability to make changes when asked easily. This comparison of these two programs, one that edits pixels primarily and one that edits shapes primarily, directly applies to all game engines, including Unity. In Unity, typically after you've sculpted or imported your terrain and had the basic shapes, you would create a layer and paint on it, and then create another layer and paint on that, and the process would continue. But Gaia is more like Illustrator. We're going to actually create layers, but we're going to add shapes to those layers. And those layers are called rules, and those shapes are called masks. Now, because this method allows you to reproduce every step of creation, it's becoming popular. The latest version of the Unreal Engine does something very similar. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we have. We have the new spawner that we made. But if we go up into Gaia Tools, you'll also notice we have the biome that we made. Remember when we said custom biome? Well, here it is. So let's go ahead and rename this. I'm going to rename it to my custom biome. After we rename this, we can go to the hierarchy window and we can see that it's changed the name to the name that I gave it. Now, if we go to the inspector and look inside this biome, we can actually make spawners here. If I click on this button, it will make a new spawner. Now that we have another spawner, you can see that it's named my custom-new spawner and that it's the child of our biome. Since we have a few spawners, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all the spawners in the scene except for the one that's underneath the biome. This way I can focus all my attention in one place. Now I'm going to quickly save the scene and save the project. We're going to need to set up a spawn rule, and if you recall, that's kind of like a layer in Illustrator or Photoshop. So we'll go ahead and click on this button here, and now we have our first spawn rule. Now we can give these spawn rules names, so I'm going to go ahead and put a name on this spawn rule. We'll call it Sand Spawned Rule. So after we finish naming our rule, we'll go ahead and look at Resource Type. It's the first drop-down menu underneath the terrain rule name. So if we look at it here, the default is terrain texture, which is actually what we're going to use first. But there are several other types here that allow you to do things like grass, trees, game objects, even light probes. Now we can have as many rules or layers as we want. So in a single spawner, you might have several of these or even all of these. But for now, we're actually going to stick with just doing a terrain texture. So let's select a sand type texture. We'll do the color map first. And I'll just type in sand and find a sample sand map. This one looks like it's going to work. So I'll double click on it to load it. Next, we need the normal map for the sand. So again, I'm just going to type sand. Find its normal map, which is usually marked with an N. And next, we need the mask map. Now, mask maps are very specific to HDRP pipeline. They have information packed in each of the channels of this image. If the HDRP pipeline interests you, I do encourage you to look up the documentation for mask maps and detail maps and get further information on channel packing. On the right, we have the Refresh Terrain Prototype button. I'll click it, and then it's going to ask if we want to add the texture to the terrain. Just click Add the Texture. As soon as the terrain updates, you'll see that the sand now covers the entire terrain. Now remember, if a rule is like a layer, then masking is what sets the shape. Now, since there is no mask, that is telling Gaia to fill the entire layer with that texture. Now we need a second layer, so let's make a new rule. After I click on Add New Rule, I'm just going to go ahead and quickly rename it to Grass Spawn Rule. Just like we did with the sand rule, we're going to have to add some textures. So I'm going to find some default grass textures. We'll do the color map first. I'll type in grass. And I think I'll use the mountain grass. Next, we have to find the normal map for this. So it'll be under grass again. And there's the normal map. And then we need the mask map. So we'll click on this and type grass one more time and load in the mask map for the grass. Let's make a mask for this grass rule. We'll go down to the mask settings section. We'll click the plus icon. It will create a mask. And this has a drop down, and we have several different types of masks that we can use. This tutorial will cover a few of the more commonly used masks, but I do encourage you to watch other tutorials or read the documentation for a full explanation of all the things that these masks can do. To start with, we're going to select the height mask, and that's going to assign the shape for this layer or this rule. Now, in order to see this, we're going to have to click at least one button, but when you click the Refresh Terrain Prototype, you'll see that it adds it to the Unity terrain, but it doesn't update the display. If you want to do this, just click on Spawn World. In a second, you'll see the grass appear, and now we can take a look at it. So the Spawn World button forces anything in Gaia's setup to refresh. So at any time, you can use this button to actually update your scene and see any changes. I'm going to adjust the texture tiling on this. So I'm going to go to size X and size Y in the grass rule and change them from 10 to 5, which will repeat the detail more. The smaller the number, the more repetition. That looks a lot better. Now I'm going to go to the sand rule and do the same thing because the details are way too large. So let's try a smaller number. Set it to 5 and 5 for the X and Y axis. And that's actually still a little too large. So I might actually reduce the size on this even more. Let's take a look. Yeah, it does seem a little big still. We'll try 2 and 2. Each time I make any change to either of the two rules, either the sand rule or the grass rule, you'll see me click the refresh terrain prototype button to see an update. I could also use the spawn world button as well. Now the sand looks much more like sand. Getting the sizing correct on your textures is a very important part of the process. Let's look at the height mask again and make some adjustments. So if we go down to the height mask, you'll see that it's set to relative to sea level and it's set to percent. Now, I'm fine with the relative set to sea level, but I'm going to click on percent and select meter. Next, let's set the boxes here that are for minimum and maximum. I'll set minimum to 2.5 meters. Since it's relative to sea level, that means it's 2.5 meters above sea level. Next, we'll click on the height mask curve. This curve represents the height mask. We can make adjustments to it. I'll right-click and add a point. And then with the left mouse button, I'll drag it up. Then I can right-click on it again and set it to broken so we can adjust these tangent handles. And I'll make the curve more like an upside-down L. Of course, you could add more points if you need to get the effect that you desire. Now, I'm going to go ahead and click on spawn down at the bottom here, and this time I clicked on spawn local, but it's a single spawner, so it updated just fine. Now if we look, we now have a beach. The beach seems a little wide, so I'm going to go ahead and change that minimum value from 2.5 to 2.2. That change means that it'll be 2.2 meters above sea level, and that should work fine. Now I'll hit spawn world, and we update it, and it made it a little narrower. Next, I'll go back to the height mask curve, and I'm just going to edit this point. This is the nice thing about the system is you can make any adjustment you want until you get the look that you like. And of course, I'm going to have to hit spawn world again to see any adjustment. It'll just take a couple of seconds after I hit the button, and there we go. We have a better beach. I think that works much better. Let's look at the curve presets that we have on these curves. I'll do the strength transform curve as an example. Now notice that we have an invert button with this curve as well. We'll test that in a second. So I'm going to just click on the preset here. This one's a straight line. Hit spawn, and you'll see the grass covers everything now. Now let's try a different preset. We'll go for this one, hit spawn. So with the presets, you can quickly go through different versions and different looks to get an idea of what you have. We'll try this one. It'll be a little subtle, but we'll try it. Subtle change, but a change. Now let's invert it by clicking the invert button. Now you'll see the sand and grass have changed places. Now I'm going to go ahead and put that back. Next I'm going to go to the strength transform curve again and just set this to the default, which is a linear progression. So it's the second icon over, and this is what we had before. So if I close this and respawn, we'll be back to where we were a few minutes ago. Since the grass rule has the masking going on, it's really determining the look. The sand has no masking, so it's just a flood fill of color. Now I'm going to go ahead and save things again. So I'll go up to File, Save, and then File, Save Project. Let's talk about sea level on the mask settings. So on the grass rule, we have it set to relative to sea level and to meters. Now we could change this. We could click on this and change it to world space instead of relative to sea level. And on the meters, we could have percent. Of course, this changes the values in min and max, so you may need to make adjustments to the two boxes underneath. If we want to test out the sea level, it just so happens that every spawner has a slider for the sea level. It's at the very top here, and we can actually use this slider to adjust the representation of our ocean. So if I move this around, you'll see that the ocean representation moves around. Now I say representation because we haven't made the final ocean yet. You won't see the material update until we go down and hit spawn world. So if I scroll down and do it now, you'll see that the grass material has adjusted for the new sea level. I'll go ahead and set this back to the way it was before, so I'll go up and adjust the sea level and then hit spawn again. It occurs to me I actually don't remember what the sea level was, which means we should probably, after I change this, talk about saving biomes and saving spawners. I'll hit the button and we'll check it. I think the ocean was actually a little lower, so I'll have to go back and set it to a lower value. Scroll back up. Let's set it to 22. And once I set this, I'll hit spawn world again, and we should be back to where we were before. All right, that looks about right. So now let's talk about saving a biome. Biomes and spawners both can be saved, and they have a section called Advanced. Let me go ahead and select our biome, which is called My Custom Biome. You can see it in blue in the hierarchy window right here. Now, if we go to Advanced, you'll see a section called Save and Load. Now we can go to Save Biome Preset, and you'll see that it's going to put it in the User Data folder for Gaia. We'll just give it a name. Call it My First Biome. Actually, I think I'll put them all in capital letters, just so it's easier to see on screen. So let me retype this real quick. After I finish typing this, I'll hit save. And now we've saved the biome. And the biome saves any spawners that are being used by it. So here's our spawner. It's called My Custom New Spawner. If we go into the project window, we look in biomes, and under My Custom, there's our spawner, and under biomes, there's My First Biome. So now we've successfully saved all this. Next, I want to break up this grass a little bit. So inside the spawner, we've got our grass rule. I'm going to go to the mask settings again, and I'm going to add a new mask. And this time, we're going to add a noise mask. So I'll click on this and find noise mask. As we talked about before, you can add as many masks as you want. You can mix and match them. Now, this fractal noise, we need to see what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and click Spawn World, and then we'll make some adjustments. Now, it's definitely breaking up the grass, but it's a little too much. So we'll just go in and we'll play with some different settings. There's no exact plan in mind. I'm just going to try different things and then see how it looks. I'll try greater than instead of multiply for the blend mode. And we'll go ahead and hit spawn world again. That's a little too much the other way. I'll put it back to multiply, I think. Now, once I respawn this, I'll go in and I'll look at the noise type settings. We're using a Perlin fractal noise, and we've got all these sliders that we can go in and play with and adjust until we get a look we want. Now, most likely the slider I'm going to want to use is octaves, but I'll play with some of the other ones, make some minor tweaks, and see what we get. Definitely octaves is going to be the one that I want. So I'll go ahead and hit spawn world again, see where we're at. Now it's going the other direction. I need to kind of invert it. I'll try it here with the settings. That's still not doing it for me. So what I'll do is probably after I respawn this, I'll go to the curve, the strength transform curve, and I'll invert it. And I'll try that. That's closer to what I really wanted. I want hints of the grass. And I want a decent blending, but I don't want it to be over the top in either direction. Let's go in on the curve and make some adjustments here. I'll drag this point with the left mouse button. Move it over. Move the tangent handle so it's flat again on that part of the curve. Hit spawn. That's pretty good, but it's a little too much sand still. Hit spawn world to see what we got. That's getting closer. The system really allows you to just try different things until you get a look that you like. Next, let's go ahead and just save this spawner. Each spawner has the ability to be saved, and it's in the same place. You select the spawner, then you find the advanced section, and you go to save and load, and click on this, open it up, and then click on save to file. Now, I'm going to want to save it over top of where it was saved before, so I'll just find it here, and then I'll hit save. And now we've saved this spawner. So you can save biomes, and you can save spawners. And we can see our spawner here in the project window. Now that we have the grass blending with the sand the way I want it, I'll take a close look at it here. I think the next thing we should do is add some trees. So I'm going to add a new rule. And I'll call this rule the tree spawn rule. So I'll type in tree real quick. And under resource type, we're going to select terrain tree. After selecting terrain tree, we now have a new slot that's open, and it's called desktop prefab. If we click on the little circle, we can now search for tree prefabs. At this stage, I'm actually not sure which trees to use. I know that my image is going to be melancholy, possibly even sad, but I really hadn't thought of the type of trees, so we're just going to try a couple. We'll try a sequoia tree first. As soon as you select a game object or a tree, if it has any complexity, it may take Unity a few seconds to process things. When this window closes, there it goes, we're going to go ahead and add a mask to this. I want these trees to stay in the area where we have our grass rule. So in the mask settings, I'm actually going to pick terrain texture, and then under texture rule, I'm going to pick our grass spawn rule. So now any trees that spawn will stay within the grass area. I'll click spawn world, and now we have trees in the grass areas. Well, right away, I can tell you that these are a little too happy for the concept I had, and more than a little too tall. So let's go to the scale, and let's set it to fixed. And let's change the size of the trees and see what we get. Scale's set to 0.75, so that's a little better, but they just don't fit the concept. But we'll try it one more time. Let's go back to the scale section, and let's try changing the width and the height down to 25. Hit spawn world. Nope. All right, last chance. Let's pick random, and we'll do random sizes on them. From 0.25 to 1.5 looks good. And that's both for the width and the height. And we'll try that and see how it works. I'll hit spawn world. That's better, but they're still too happy for the concept that I want. I'm going for more melancholy. Since these guys aren't working out, we're just going to have to pick a different type of tree. So we can go back to the desktop prefab slot. It's up towards the top here. And I'll click on it. Click on the little circle. And find a different type of tree. Let's go for an oak tree. Now this is showing promise. I like this. So as I'm looking at this and thinking about the concept I have in my head, I think that this is probably a pretty good start. Now, we can adjust how many trees spawn and how close together they spawn with two sliders. The sliders are location increment and probability rate. Now, if I lower the probability rate and hit spawn world, you'll see that less trees spawn. This is because the probability of them spawning was decreased. Now let's go and play with location increment. I'll drop it down to a lower value, say 6, and hit spawn world. There we go. Now we have a forest. That's looking really good. Now, I might need more room for some abandoned, destroyed buildings. So let's go ahead and increase location increment a little bit. I'll actually set it to 12. Give that a test. Although that might be a little much. Now, I needed space for a few destroyed, abandoned buildings, but this is too much space. It's looking kind of like a golf course now. So setting of 12 on location increment might have been a little too much. Since I started with a setting of 6 and this is 12, let's try 8 for the setting and hit spawn world again. That seems to be perfect for what I have planned. Just for fun, I'll go to the terrain texture mask, and for the texture rule, instead of using the grass to spawn the trees, let's use the sand to spawn the trees and hit spawn world. Now, of course, you're going to see trees under the ocean and a few trees on the island where the sand is mixing with the grass. Let's set that back and hit spawn world. Now that everything's back, I'm going to save the spawner and make sure it's in the correct location and hit save. And now I'll just save the scene and the project. And this lesson at this point is done. While I'm saving the scene in the project, let's go over some concepts that we learned. We know that biomes can be considered to be a collection of spawners. And we know that spawners have rules. And these rules are very similar to layers in a paint program or an illustration program. And of course, we learned that each of these spawners' rules are able to have masks. These masks allow us to have different shapes on our individual layers, on our rules. And lastly, we learned that spawners can have as many rules as we wish, and that each of those rules can use as many masks as you choose. We will continue with this example in the next video.